A relationship with the right referral partner could be a game changer for any B2B company. So what if you could reverse engineer these relationships at a moment's notice? Start a podcast, invite potential referral partners to be guests on your show, and grow your referral network faster than ever. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Matt Ferguson. He is the Executive VP over at Mower. Matt, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Logan. How about you?
I am doing fantastic, sir. Thanks for asking, and thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be talking about some practical things you can do to become a leader in your industry and within the segment of the market that you serve. But before we jump straight into that, Matt, I would love for you to give listeners a little bit of background on yourself and what you and your team are up to these days.
Sure. I've been in the marketing and advertising business for a lot of years, mostly on the agency side. Before I came to Mower, I was with the Walt Disney Company and worked on the ESPN Wide World of Sports, and that was an interesting B2B and consumer challenge because we were not only driving consumers to come to the events there, but we were also recruiting events to come. So we were doing a lot of advertising, marketing, and PR to organizations that might bring their events to the Wide World of Sports. And then I also worked on the Walt Disney World brand, which was obviously more of a consumer challenge. And then I came to the agency and have really worked on a variety of accounts, but have developed a specialty in B2B for sure. And Mower, as an agency, we're in an interesting niche. We're one of the 3 largest B2B agencies in the U.S., and we're also pretty balanced in terms of the capabilities that we have. As far as we can tell, we're the only agency we know of that's nationally ranked by Ad Age as an ad agency, by PR as a PR firm, and recently by Chief Marketer as one of the best engagement and activation agencies. So we really think from an integrated standpoint and try to put a multidisciplinary team around the table to solve clients' problems. That's kind of our differentiator as an agency.
Yeah, I love that. We noticed you guys on the Chief Marketer Top 200, and I was really excited to have you on the show because you guys are obviously doing some things right. If we can, before we jump into some of the things you wanted to share with listeners, I wanted to camp out on that a little bit in your expertise with obviously 2, household brands with ESPN and Disney. What are some of the things from those experiences that really have influenced you as a B2B marketer working, within the walls of those, like I said, household brand names that we all know and love?
Yeah, one of the things that attracted me to the Walt Disney Company was the way that they do everything with excellence, and that's something that I've tried to carry on that you can apply to really any brand, B2B or consumer. And, at the agency, I've had a chance to work on some really cool brands on the B2B side, like GE and Nucor, which is the largest steel company in America, and one of they tend to be on those most admired lists. And so the way I look at it, those kind of brands are just as essential to kind of American business as Disney. But Disney definitely taught me that a level of excellence is critical in doing great work.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Matt, let's dive into some of the things that you wanted to share with listeners on how to become really a leader in your segment of the market and your industry. And the first one is really this idea of promoting your industry and not just your brand as a whole. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and first of all, I think any sort of brand can assert their leadership, whether they're the number one brand or not. And
Mhm.
I just wanted to share some principles today on how do you think about really positioning your clients or your brand as a leader. And so the first one is the opportunity to promote your industry. I mean, there's really nothing that endears you to your customers like being an advocate for the whole industry. And one client that we applied that on is Domtar Paper. They're the largest maker of copier and printer paper in North America, so they're kind of the Dunder Mifflin, so to speak. But Domtar came to us because they were seeing a decline in paper consumption, obviously, and they were
Right.
seeing these think before you print messages at the bottom of emails. And so they're getting a little nervous about that. And so initially they thought they needed an environmental campaign. They said, help us, do a sustainability effort. And we agreed that they needed to take a leadership position in paper like that, but we had a hypothesis that the decline in paper consumption was really not as much about people's enviro guilt as much as it was about some competition out there for from electronic devices in terms of
Mhm.
how we communicate these days. So we
Right.
conducted some research, and we found that when we asked people if you could be convinced the paper was blank, would you use more? And we asked environmentally friendly, but we also asked factors about the utility and usefulness of paper, like what if paper was the best way to communicate a message or the best way to store something or the most attention getting way to communicate. Those utility and usefulness factors were much bigger drivers of purchase than the environmental factors. So it was then we said, we really need a broader message here and about all the virtues of paper. So we created a campaign called Paper Because, which has been an award-winning effort, just reminding people of all the great things about paper. And just through taking on the mantle of paper, being a leading brand, we were able to double awareness even for the Domtar brand, just because they took ownership of
Mhm.
advocating for their industry.
Yeah.
And we also doubled intent to purchase the Domtar brand after the first year of the campaign, just because if you think about big purchasers of paper like printers, they're like, thank you for advocating for our industry. We're going to buy more
Mhm.
paper from you
Right.
guys.
Yep.
And our sales guys were singing our praises for that.
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you that because as a recovering copier salesperson who sold to those
Yeah,
commercial print shops, I know the Domtar brand. I love how you referenced Dunder Mifflin for folks who aren't in that space. But coming out of that, I've seen some of that work that you guys did for that brand, and I love that example. So, in addition to advocating for your industry, the second thing that you're really big proponent of, Matt, in being thought of and becoming a leader in your space is recognizing success and not just your own success, not just putting out a PR bulletin when you have your own success, but pointing out the success of others in your space too, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, maybe you can be the sponsor of a top 10 list in your industry. The Freightliner is one of our clients, and they're known for on-highway trucks, the ones that haul freight down the road. But they had quietly emerged as a real player in work trucks, like dump trucks and garbage trucks, cement mixers, things like
Okay.
that. But they
Okay.
weren't really getting credit for that leadership position, and they felt like they were missing out on some big RFPs and weren't being considered in certain scenarios. So the natural inclination might have been, hey, let's run some ads that say we're number one in certain categories. But we decided to come up with a bigger platform idea, and we said, what if Freightliner, you guys could name the hardest working cities in North America? And we ended up doing it. We looked at 11 data points that kind of recognized a hardworking city, from construction starts to sales of work trucks. And we named those cities. We would go into these metro areas, give a major award to the mayor. We'd have food trucks brought out to job sites and celebrate the workers. And yes, we had advertising. We had ads in the Business Journal and trade journals. but it was really more about the earned media. I mean, we had tons of earned media and social and the press, millions of impressions, and we were able to significantly grow consideration and market share for work trucks, and we actually sold trucks at the events because guys that are big truck buyers that are responsible for big fleets would come out to the event and say, "Hey, I don't think we've included you guys in an RFP in a while. We've got one coming up. Let's get you on there." And so it was a real awareness builder and impression builder, but it also sold trucks.
Yeah, I love that. When you take a second to step back and change the game from we need to sell this, how do we blast that message to the market, into how do we engage the market that we're trying to reach with something that they care about? It might be an end around. It might take a few more steps, but man, is it so much more wildly effective. It's one of the reasons we consult with our clients to not have a podcast that is all about, beating their chest about their product or their service and their accolades, but to highlight their customers. And you guys, did the exact same thing here with Freightliner. And I just love that strategy. And you guys are very much like-minded. So I love what you're saying there, Matt. So we've talked about promoting your industry. We've talked about recognizing success in the space that you serve. The third thing I know you wanted to touch on is being an authority on what's important to your customers. Tell us a little bit about how you guys think about that, or maybe, another example. So far, the stories that you're sharing are just phenomenal examples unpacking, these tactics that you're talking about, Matt.
Yeah, if you want to show that you're a leader or an authority on what's important to customers, one way you can do that is by funding a study to track important trends that customers care about. And one example that we've done for a client, we work with Paychex, which is a company that does payroll and HR. And their sweet spot, they work with some large and medium-sized companies, but their sweet spot is small business. And so we help them develop a small business index that we publicize on a regular basis. We put out the results on a monthly basis. And as a result of sponsoring and creating that study, we're creating opportunities every month for Paychex to get in front of business owners in the financial press, including a regular spot on CNBC where the CEO goes on there and he talks about the latest results on how small business is doing.
Man, I love that. Yet again, you're connecting to the passions of your buyers, and that in a way that doesn't make it all about you, but at the end of the day, you get the connections with the folks that you're trying to reach the most, right?
Yeah.
I love it. So the fourth point I know you wanted to touch on, Matt, is integration, taking this strategy and making sure that you reinforce it in different touch points. Can you give us some examples of how you guys or your clients have done this well to take this message and really take, a multifaceted approach?
Yeah, and if you look at any of these angles that we've talked about or any other message angle, it's really going to be most powerful when you reinforce it at every touch point. And not only that, but you think about how do we accelerate people through the buy cycle from being aware to considering to really mapping out that customer journey toward purchase and then finally advocating. So usually it's going to be a mixture of earned media, paid media, and owned media, and really thinking about how all of those things play into the mix and what's appropriate to talk about message-wise, but you really want to have a tight umbrella message under the whole thing or over the whole thing. And so if you look at what we've done with Freightliner, there was advertising, there was PR, there were events, but it all was under that tight umbrella of we're one of the leaders in work trucks. We're naming the hardest working cities in America.
What in your mind, Matt, is kind of standing in the way of this sort of thinking of, the way I described it, doing an end around thinking, reverse engineering the relationships, the things that your market really cares about? Do you think, a lot of folks just get so laser focused on we've got to share our value prop. We've got to put our new features in front of folks. A lot of our listeners are in the tech space. And so they may have, kind of product focused companies that, when they release new features, it's just this mentality. Do you think it's that internal culture kind of pushing product and service offering first, or where do you see kind of the differences in the brands that you guys work with in the ones that are able to successfully make the shift and take these strategies and really apply them?
Yeah, I think you've nailed one of the biggest temptations is ultimately you do have this group of products that you're trying to sell. And if a new one comes out, you want to talk about that new one, for example. But what is the overarching message that your brand stands for? And how does that new product tier up to that message? You want to make sure you link it to the greater brand to get the greater power, because otherwise you're paying money for a lot of little micro campaigns that don't really add up to much. But if they all sort of reinforce that broader brand message, then there's a lot more power in that. There's a multiplier effect with your budget.
Yeah. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Matt. I love the approach you guys are taking. To recap for folks, we've talked about ways that you can really position yourself as a leader and be thought of as a leader by, one, promoting your industry as a whole, recognizing success in your space, and really being an authority on what's important to your customers, that may be adjacent to your product or service, but delivering value that isn't directly tied to what you do, but is providing value there, and then making sure that you integrate that message across, sales, marketing, and your various campaign strategies, across paid, social, and everything else that you're incorporating. Matt, I've loved this conversation. I love the stories you've been sharing. If anybody listening to this would like to stay connected with you, learn more about what you guys are up to over at Mower, or reach out and ask some follow-up questions, what's the best way for them to find you?
Well, for Mower, our social media is all under the title Mower Agency. So if you go to Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, it's all under Mower Agency. For me, I've got various handles. Probably the best way to reach me business-wise would be in LinkedIn, and my LinkedIn profile is / Matt Ferguson Marketing. I'm on Twitter a little bit, and that's at Marketing Matt. And then on Instagram, I'm wide open on Instagram, and I've got an OG address there of M Ferguson. That's when I was using it just for when I was an early adopter and was using it just to filter photographs, and so I just created like a username, M Ferguson. Yeah. So, but anybody's welcome to connect with me there.
Awesome. M Ferguson 1.0 on Instagram. Go way back deep in the feed. I love it, Matt. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, for sharing some great examples for listeners to learn from. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show, Matt.
All right, Logan, it was fun.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big 3. A no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.